The reality, since we started doing this cold intro format, is honestly that every time I just want it to be like an 80s WWE like hype session. Like I just want to roll into the cold intro like, you don't know, man. The cream rises to the top.
So you're looking for fireworks and like entry songs.
Just over the top. You can't smell what the data-driven marketer is cooking.
I need to slap my elbows and then put a bunch of like, I'm going to slather
oil?
up in Aquaphor.
Yeah, slather up in baby oil. Hey, this is the Data-Driven Marketer, sponsored by NetWise. I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
Welcome back for another hang in the data basement. Thanks for joining us. How you doing?
Doing great. I don't know why, but I'm bringing a lot of energy today to the afternoon.
Yeah, it's good. I dig it. What are we talking about?
We are talking about business data, but kind of from the lens of a classic conversation and terminology in our space that people struggle with, which is first party and third party data. And
really, I think it breaks down to like what businesses are doing with their data, like what's actually happening in the space of all the data that's, we've done episodes about what we mean when we say data and how it gets to data-driven marketing, but there's a whole bunch of stuff happening, maybe in the data science department, maybe just by the data science people you have, maybe contractors, who knows, maybe just your marketing team. But it collides with this terminology that's increasingly out there, in part because we have like legislation popping up that's trying to deal with it and stuff like that. And as people in the position that you and I are in, I frequently am sitting there going, oh no, they don't understand this at all. And they're about to make a law that's going to do a thing. And so I think that's where we're trying to start. Like what are businesses, not what we mean by the data, but what are businesses doing with data, right? So I guess the first place to start in this context specifically is, what do we mean by data? Because we did that episode before that was like, this isn't the same feed that comes back at you off of like ads that you're running and stuff. It's not so much campaign data or behavioral data. This is more like, what's this internal?
Yeah, we're just talking anything, right? Like what's being generated.
Right.
That's an important place to start with this, right? Because I think this is a broader conversation about how to think about data assets in businesses and what's happening with data and how are companies connecting via data. I kind of want to say it's everything that's getting digitized at companies, which I think is a fair line to draw, right? If you're not gathering it on a computer, it's pretty hard to argue that you're going to be able to do useful data science with it, right?
Right. Well, I was going to say, it's hard to do the science on. So if you want to back it up even further, if just for fun, like before we had it digitized, it was your registry of customers, maybe a registry of potential leads, that's coming from wherever it's coming from, and Jack Lemmon and
I guess it was
Al
just
Pacino are fighting over them in the back row of the office.
It's just information, right? I guess that's we took it back, right? So it's anything, right? It's everything about your business. It's where you exist. It's who your employees are. It's what you do all day. It's what your product line is, and all of that is information about your business. And it's you don't even think about it as that, right? It's just things things your customers know, things you say, things you tell them, behaviors, processes. And what's happening is as we digitize these things, all of that stuff gets quantifiable, right? And so all of a sudden it moves from just like being a fact in the world to being like a set of related facts that are in a system that you can now analyze or look for a trend in. And now it becomes data. And everything about business is being digitized because it makes us more efficient in a lot of ways. Sometimes it makes us less efficient, but so businesses are using all kinds of software to manage all their departments and to execute on all their processes and to manage their content and their media and their product lines and their warehouses and their shipping and their fulfillment. And that's all creating data streams. like massive, insane amounts of data that if you're not thinking about it right, it just disappears into a computer and it never crosses your desk again. But it's all important because it all reflects what's going on in your business and the business world at large. It's all connected. It's a big graph of what's going on with the world.
Well, and what's the thing that I often mention in this context is like that's interesting is the data was always there in a lot of contexts. We just didn't have the capacity to collect it and like and make it actionable. So, it's sort of one of those funny things. You're like, where was all this data coming from? It's coming from, we suddenly have the capacity to look at every single, like the example I kept thinking was like, okay, the way you used to do it is you got reporting from sales. And so you understood that your widget was selling a lot in Pennsylvania, but that's probably like all you knew. And you could take guesses at like why it was selling in Pennsylvania. And now we literally can go, okay, well, it's selling more in Lancaster than it is in Bethlehem. And so maybe there's like, you can start to, again, you're still kind of just guessing until you find the data point that is the difference. And this is what data scientists are doing. They're finding the correlation and going, what it correlates with is Amish population. And then you find out that like your widget is being used for a thing that you didn't understand that has to do with fixing wagons.
I'm very familiar with both those towns.
So
good train stores.
So this kind of is a bridge though into the first party, third party conversation, because this is where we're talking about what types of data you have. And so far, all of everything we've talked about, I think would be classified as first party data, right? It's all stuff that is internal to the company, gathered by the company. It's what we know about our customers. It's what we know about our product sales. It's what we're getting back from our team regarding the interplay of all that stuff. What's third party data?
Well, this is where this gets confusing right away for people because third party data is just that same data, but you gave it to someone else to use for something else. Right. So like I come to you and I'm like, hey, you sell like wagon wheels and I sell wagon axles. Can I get your customer list to sell my wagon axles to the people who are buying wagon wheels from you? Now, all of a sudden that data, the information's the same, but conceptually, because you've transferred it to me and you've given it to me for my own purposes, as opposed to there's like this weird middle zone second party data that people talk about, or you don't really hear about it much, but you basically just sold me a marketing list, so that I can sell a product that's complementary to yours to a list that's really helpful. And now for me, it's third-party data. I bought it. I didn't aggregate it myself. I probably didn't get those people's permission to use it directly, right? So all of a sudden you're seeing like back in the days of wagons, there was no one like up in arms about privacy. Like, am I selling my wagon wheels and my axles to the right people with the right privacy concerns?
Do I care if you tell him that I bought a wagon wheel from you?
Right.
No,
man. So I'm just trying to move my wheat.
So in this context, first party data or third party data is just someone else's first party data that they are willing to sell to you or provide to you in some way.
Totally. And that's keeping this really, really simple, right? Where like a company just produces some information and then they give you that like exact digital copy of that information.
What is second party data? I'm curious.
I always look this up because I'm reading about it right now because I feel like every time I have this conversation, I have it slightly different.
Well, every time I do talk about it, I always think about the just narration, right? First person and third person. And then second person is weird because it's like someone else's voice explaining what the character did, they experienced the character doing or something.
It's so the story we just told actually is second party data based on at least how Lotame defines it. And they're reasonably established. And the reason this doesn't get talked about is because it doesn't really work this way. Most companies aren't just like licensing their customer list to like another company directly. That's second party data according to this, right? Like I'm the originator of the data and I sell it to you and then you use it for something. Third party is what typically everyone's doing when they think about like buying data in the business space. Some intermediary gets the information. Very likely they do something with it, right? They get a bunch of sources of information and aggregate it. And then you buy it from them and use it.
Got it. Okay. So So if I'm getting it directly from the company that collected it, second party
Yeah.
data. Third party data is some other aggregator in the middle has gone to all the companies and said, if I buy up all this data, I can resell it and it'll be helpful for people.
Yeah, and the concept of second party data, I think, is kind of dumb. There's no reason to really talk about it because it's the same data as first party data, and then you're just buying it from someone.
Just
so it's kind of the same
handed
as
off
third
by a
party.
different person. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so everyone's got different definitions for these, but the concept here is that someone originates information, right? They're the first person to get it. Maybe they're the only person who can get it because, like in this case, it's someone's information about their business internally, and then they can use it themselves. So you can use your own first party data for all kinds of analytics. That's like a traditional business use case of knowing about your business and making decisions that way. Or you can start to pass that along, whether you're selling that or giving it, whether you're editing it, or manipulating it and just giving pieces, or if you're just giving it all, whether you sell it to someone who's going to do something with it, or you sell it to someone who's going to like aggregate and resell it, kind of all the same in my mind after that. So you essentially have data you gathered and then other data.
Right. Well, so then that gets us to the next piece that I think always comes up when we're talking to people about this, which is the aggregator versus originator conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned the aggregators, right? That's the company that's out there pooling together all the stuff and selling it third party to whoever else.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really cover the whole landscape of what's happening. And this is the space where the misunderstanding exists that, for example, the legislators are completely missing, right? If you cut it off at just saying, okay, well, it's third party and anyone who's collecting third party data is an aggregator, then it's cutting out this whole swath of data science and gets to the ID graphs episode that we talked about. Like, that's not really what's happening. There's a whole bunch of other stuff happening that's actually value add behavior.
Right.
That is why you want to work with these ultimately what we would call third parties, but they're not necessarily just aggregators.
Right.
And it's the thing we deal with a lot because at NetWise, we think of ourselves as an originator, not an aggregator.
Right.
And when somebody just says, oh, so you're just a data broker, it's like, well, not really, because we're doing a lot of other things.
At all.
To
get out of here, man.
Yeah. Get out of here, man.
Get out of my face. This is an important conversation because technologically and philosophically, like there almost is no such thing as just a pure data aggregator. It doesn't make sense. You have to do something to information. You're merging it, you're blending it, you're adding, it's additive or it's subtractive. Like unless you're literally just like, I'm buying a list of names from a company and then I go resell that exact same name of companies. You did something in there, and that kind of is traditional, right? I think a lot of people, when they think like business data, they're just like white pages, right? Which is not a horrible abstraction, but pretty simplistic given what's actually going on in the world now with information. So, the concept of someone just buying some data and then reselling it, that totally exists. And what's interesting is that business model actually sucks. So you can't make very much money there. So those companies tend to be shady. So you don't want to buy data from someone who's just like buying and reselling it right away. That's sketchy. They can't make any margin on it because they're not adding any value. So like capitalistically, their incentive to be shady is like really high. So you want to work with companies that are doing sophisticated things. You want them value adding to a product. So this is it's interestingly, I'm reminded of working in my previous company in manufacturing supply chain. There's a lot of similarities with how manufacturers work, right? They're companies that literally just resell what you manufacture. You kind of outsource your sales force to these intermediaries who like cover different parts of the country, and they literally are just reselling the exact part, right? I make a tire, I manufacture a tire, and then my like partner companies go out and sell those tires. But then you also have these value-added resellers, which is like a specific term in manufacturing, and they specifically will like customize the tires. They'll bling them out, or they'll change the treads on them, or they'll add things to them, or they'll package them up and sell them as sets or for different types of vehicles or service different markets. And so in data with computers, they're And even in that manufacturing example, there just aren't very many companies that don't do something else, right? Because it doesn't make sense. You've got this interesting middleman position where your business gets to be something different. The manufacturing part was already taken care of, right? The data was already created. What do you want to do to it now to like make your business more successful, make your products more valuable? So you pretty much always end up with people doing something now with the information. Even the first party giving it to other people. I don't just open my database as a business that's selling information. I'm not just going to like give you all my accounting information, like my finances for the last 12 years. I'm going to slice it up. I'm going to analyze it and give you some. I'm going to sell something that's like not proprietary to me or not extra things that you don't need. So, and the subtlety here and the granularity that you get into when it's data, when it's information sitting in a computer is like infinite, right? So slice and dice it an infinite number of ways. There's so much subtlety to it.
And yeah, and it ends up being a misunderstanding, like on the level of saying that, you know, a steel company doesn't provide any extra value because all they do is take iron ore and nickel and chromium and whatever and combine it into steel as an alloy. And then, you know, it'd be like the legislators going, yeah, but you're just mashing together a bunch of other metals. So you're just the metal masher and you're just actually
moving.
That's kind of shady. And we think people should know where their metals come from. And so we're not going to let you build skyscrapers with your steel.
Right. Right. No, and these are, you're hitting on an interesting thing here, right? As we've moved from the physical world to the digital world, people don't recognize a lot of the stuff that's happening in the physical world, right? Even if I'm just, if all I do is resell your iron ingots that you've pulled out of the ground, I'm still shipping them. I'm still moving them. I'm still communicating with people about them. I'm still making marketing material about them. I'm still a business transacting. I'm still making financial transactions. There's a tremendous amount of process around everything. And in the digital world, you have to face all that because you have to engineer software that does it. It's not a person anymore, like driving a truck full of metal somewhere where you can just kind of like abstract it out of your mind. In a computer world, an engineer has to write a line of code for literally every single tiny little piece of interaction. So you see this stuff in a very different way where you end up breaking it down. And so from the technical side of data, it's super frustrating for me being on the technical side because whenever we run into whenever we're looking at like compliance and regulations and people are asking questions like first, second, third party data, sources, etc., it's super specific to their perspective, right? What are you trying to figure out? What are you trying to plan for? How do you look at this industry? How do you want to use this information? And then it's not an opaqueness that I'm trying to present, but it's a transparency, and it's complicated, right? Whether or not your information is first, second, third party, and how it applies to different conversations is just wildly different in every conversation.
Well, and I think, you know, the easiest way I think of to look at it, and this is where I should just post a link to the ID graph episode that we did because we cover a lot of this stuff. But like the essence of data science, in a sense, I mean, sure, there's all of the, you know, there's the testing and the correlations and the matching and the whatever. But like ultimately what you're creating as you do data science is new data that's about how the data points relate inside of your data set. And so if you say you've got A and you've got C and B is how they're linked, and B I observed by doing science,
right,
and I added that to the data set, well, I just made B up out of taking A and C and looking at them. And so like that's why we get to the originator versus aggregator thing, because if you look at a company like NetWise, a small percentage of what we're doing is scooping up the stuff that we need to scoop up. Mm-hmm. Most of what we're doing is creating completely new data by looking at the relationships between all of those things. And people, like, it's not that people discount it. It's just the weird mental model thing. The idea that you can just, you know, and this is where the steel analogy breaks, right? Because you can only make as much steel as all of the resources that you bring in, right? Mm-hmm. So if you bring in, you know, 2 tons of iron, 2 tons of the other thing, and 2 tons of the other thing, you're not spitting out 20 tons of steel. it's physically impossible.
Right.
And so it's easy for you to see how you synthesized all of those materials down into this alloy. And so that's where the value is. With data, you still have data point A and you still have data point C that have the value that they always had.
Right.
And now you added B on top of it. You just fattened that data set and you went, look, I put some work in here. So now I'm going to charge you a little extra for this data set compared to if you just had A and C. And everybody goes, wait a minute, but where did B come from? And it's like, I just made it up with science. And I
made it up.
So like it makes sense that it sort of breaks brains in terms of trying to understand what's happening here, because it cascades. Because then once you have B, you can go, but then you also have D and F, and E is how they relate. And now you're seeing that B relates to E. And now you have, I don't even know what letter to give that one, because the sequence breaks when you start to try to connect those to epsilon or something. Like, and it compounds and compounds until you have this blob that's this graph thing we described in the other episode that's just all of this useful data.
Yeah, you just told it in a great storyline, right? And the analogy that I try to use sometimes, right, of like bringing those metals in and then making something physical out of them, like bringing a bunch of aluminum and turn it into like an aluminum alloy wheel. That doesn't really, it's not a perfect analogy because of what you said, right? You use up the aluminum in the process, but in a data with information, right, digital information that's stored on a computer, it's always just additive. You're always just adding things to it. Like if you give me a bunch of information about a business, and then I'm able to look at like a market at large and understand its industry and then apply a bunch of categories to those businesses, I've invented something, I've added something, I've created something that's a derivative product of what you gave me. It like existed there somewhat like inherently, like at a spiritual level in the universe, right? I needed something underneath of it to come up with it, but no one had done it yet. It hadn't been organized or structured or given a name. And so now not only is the original information that was like someone else's first party that maybe someone bought and then resold to you, now you have it as a third party, but then you did something to it. That new data is something different. It wasn't like gathered from somebody. It was created. It was manifested by your data science team. And so now it's like, it's your first party data, but it's sitting on top of someone else's data that is third party data to you. And now it's all mixed up and confusing.
And that doesn't even get to the aspect of scale that is, what makes it so mind boggling. Because if you want to double back to our sort of cave painting version of this way back, like before the digital stuff, like, yeah, you have your towns in Pennsylvania. Well, now you have every town everywhere all at once, and you can put all those linkages together, and then all of those linkages have linkages, and it cascades into this place where without the computers to help us weed through it, we wouldn't even be like, it just would take lifetimes on lifetimes to even go through the lists of data.
Yeah.
But now that the computers can do it, we can go, oh, here's a trend here.
And that's where we kind of reach the modern marketing, where modern marketers are relevant, right? Because I'm sure people didn't like yellow pages and white pages and stuff back in the day when you were in a phone book, and their business model was very similar, right? I think you had to call the yellow pages and pay them to not publish your information. That was part of their business model. But the scale of data collection now is such, and the ability to execute technological concepts and execute, in our case, marketing, right across the digital ecosystem so effectively, people just, they feel what's going on, right? Very few people have any clue how ads work in the digital space, like why they see ads on their phone or on the internet or inside an app they're using. But they can feel like inherently what's going on. They know, right? This started happening 5 or 6 years ago as programmatic advertising really took off. People were like, I was just looking at that shoe the other day on a website, and now I see it on the New York Times while I'm reading an article. And they're like, stuff's happening, information's exchanging hands. And now because because marketing touches humans as opposed to just being like pure business analytics, there's an emotional response to it now. And so there's this flurry of how do we handle privacy and transparency, and how does the industry come to terms with regulations? And marketing is just Marketing is just where customers, where people interact with businesses. So that's all we're seeing, and there's already a lot to figure out there. There's so much more behind the scenes within businesses and how they communicate with each other and information they share and what's going on and how networks are built and customer pipelines. And so there's just unfathomable amounts of information being generated right now by businesses, and really truthfully starting to be used and executed on and shared, right? Data is such a valuable is such a valuable product and such a valuable tool that we're just going to see just a continued flood of sharing and technology products and data products and
continued synthesis of like new stuff, or the capturing of relationships that we, previously didn't articulate. And so, it feels in the end to me like a long way of just saying, if you're just thinking about first party versus third party data and aggregators, then you're completely missing what's actually happening here.
Right.
And what you're saying about marketing and all that kind of stuff, like this is the exciting time to be in marketing because of the stuff that you can do and how it's novel. But I mean, here's a great way to kick it into this sort of back portion and talking specifically about stuff that we deal with. Anyone who has used HubSpot or some of these sort of like ABM tools knows that you can do things now where I can say, okay, well, if I have you in my CRM, I can now make the website say, hi, Brian, thanks for coming back.
Right.
But we also still live in a world where, like, I, as a marketer, I'm not sure I want to do that. I'm completely comfortable doing it inside of a dashboard because they logged in. They feel like you should know that it's them.
That's funny.
But if I do it on a site where all I know is that they visited 4 times and they filled out a form, somehow that feels a little creepy. And so I don't know if I want to do it or not.
Right.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what data, like, I could have to play with to build an interesting experience. So, like, where does that leave us as marketers and stuff, right? Like you kind of, it's almost like, that the imitation game or whatever it was, right? Like the thing where they figured out the code, but then they couldn't use it right away because then the Germans would know that we cracked the cipher and
that's another good analogy.
Like, it's the same thing where there's so much we could do that could be so cool for users and in a not creepy way. If everyone could just get on board with the idea that, like, okay, look, everyone knows everything and let's just treat the whole web more like an app.
Right.
Where,
for marketing in particular, because it's kind of at the center of a lot of these conversations, but for data as a business, right? Data as a business model or as a product line or whatever you want to call it, we need to recognize that this all needs to be understood more broadly by people. If information is being used that's about people or about another business or about another entity, in some capacity, it seems fair. It seems reasonable that they should have some say in that. Now, from a business sense, if there's a transaction, right? Like when you sign up for a newsletter, you give your information away and there's terms there. There are reasons why there's like a contract on that. And people don't think about that, but you entered into a contract with that business that allows them to use your information in a certain way. So we just need to make that better and more accessible and more transparent. And then people will ease up to this. Because if you look at like generationally how comfortable everyone is with technology, it's not just the technology that people are comfortable with, but it's like the publicness of living within technology, right? Kids younger than us, I used to be the hip crowd. I'm old now. I'm like middle generation with social media. Young kids just live in video, right? I'm not comfortable just producing video all day and putting it online. I just intrinsically feel funny. The hairs on the back of my neck go up. But like my nieces and nephews, TikTok, they don't give a shit. So it's a mind shift too, right? People not only do we need to get more comfortable with this concept, but we need to build out systems that enable people to understand everything better. And that's our job as technologists, right? People running technology businesses and people specifically us at NetWise, right? As a data company, it's really important for us to push this kind of stuff forward. We want regulation, right? We want there to be transparency in our industry. We want there to be rules and ways that you're allowed to use information and ways that as a society and as businesses, we've decided you can't use it because that creates a stable business environment, right? And it allows companies to innovate and build products that not only make a difference, right? Generate wealth for their employees and their families and their partners and customers, but that society can be comfortable with and happy with and know that it's moving everything in positive directions.
That's a good place to tease a series of episodes we'll have upcoming soon with some cool guests to talk about the sort of cookie apocalypse and, cookieless solutions and all that kind of, those fun buzz terms that anyone in the marketing space has heard lately. But it relates to this, right? Some of these solutions, part of the problem, the saying, well, it's first party and it's third party and it's aggregators. It doesn't, it's what we've got right now because we sort of cobbled the whole thing together on the fly because we invented this internet thing and then we invented this web thing and everybody went, whoa, we could do this with it. What if we do this? Oh, what if we try that? And there's so many, there's just tons of dead standards in the wake of things that just didn't work. So it completely makes sense that when's the last time you used Gopher for anything? Ever? You ever use Gopher for anything?
I don't
Certainly
even know what Gopher
most of our listeners never use Gopher for anything.
What is Gopher?
It used to be an equivalent like FTP protocol. It was a file transfer protocol between academic institutions and stuff. But it died
Gopher protocol.
In spite of having a cute mascot and everything. So it makes sense that we are where we are, but now we're at the point where we're having a conversation about, well, what should the future look like? And that's where all this cookieless stuff is coming from. And some of it is, companies saying, look, cookies don't work the way we wanted them to. It's kind of a hack together way to do the thing that we're doing. And so, as it lands on NetWise, we're working on incorporating open standards to make this data universe not go away, but then do it in a way that has what you're talking about, that level of transparency. And the whole conversation, is it first party, is it third party, only even matters in a world where, like you said, people aren't aware of these, structures and how this stuff works. And then they compare it to how it used to be. And it's certainly 30 years ago, just none of this existed.
You're totally right. We only have those labels in context of the conversation of is first party better than third party? Is it dangerous? Is it going to get regulated? Is it going to get sketchy? And I'm going to tell everyone a secret. Everybody's just buying data and using it for their businesses. So some people are doing super shady things. Some people are not. Most people are just using information to be more effective at their jobs. So and this is not just a plug because we sell data about businesses, but everyone is using information intelligently these days. It's very functional. It's a product like anything else, right? Lotus 123, when it launched and allowed spreadsheets, open the floodgates for people to start using information. And this is the latest iteration of it. So there are hugely important conversations to have. There's going to be hugely important regulation and legislation globally, right, that comes into effect this, and it's probably going to shake up major industries, but this isn't going to go away. We're not going to shut off the idea of learning about things and sharing the things we've learned. That's ridiculous. So the tech industry is going to keep existing and keep doing great things. But there are things that is happening right now that may be problematic, and some of those are really obvious and they need to be corrected. So this is just a cycle. And big data, which I don't think we've used that horrible buzz term this entire conversation or on any of our podcasts. I don't think I've ever said big data.
I think you're right.
It's big data is here to stay.
For sure.
And with a horrible cliche.
Yeah, but so, right. There's sort of two pieces of what you just said. The first one is one that we repeat a lot, which is the idea of shutting it down doesn't work. right? Because first party, third party, blah, 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 whatever. Like the web runs on this information and digital products. Like if you want to continue going to a website to look up the menu for the restaurant you're going to go to tonight, this stuff has to exist.
Right.
They need to be able to serve you that information via a server, which means you got to tell somebody where you are, like literally geographically, what node are you near so I can send the electricity to you.
Yeah, you're not a ghost.
You can see the things, right?
You have to physically exist in some capacity to do these things. So it's very philosophical at this level, right? Because it does come down at some level, especially when you're talking about information about people. It's how do you feel, right? Because like your example is great. If I go to a store to buy something, no one cares that the person at the store saw me there. No one's ever complained about that, right? I have to physically be there to buy a suit, right? You can't say the store can't track me that I was in the store. Like I was there. I went there to buy the suit. If I go to someone's website and buy a suit, everyone's all up in arms all of a sudden that they know you were there. Like, give me a break.
And I don't want to break anyone's heart, but the reason that they have customer loyalty cards is not so that they can give you a discount because they're bros. It's so they can know exactly what you bought and connect it to your phone number. So the last piece, though, I think it's the thing that you and I talk about a lot personally and also on our other podcast is the idea of you didn't call it knowledge, but it's essentially knowledge and the sharing of knowledge. And there's, again, a funny disconnect where once it's digital and it's trivial for me to send you all of the world's knowledge by saying, here's Wikipedia, look at it. Like people get weird where, when you said it some way earlier that made me say like, and is that any different from a textbook? Like, except the textbook costs way more than it should for the paper and you have to go to school and then, but like, it's just full of data that you're going to take in and then synthesize ideas from and then do with it, like do stuff with. And we're like, yeah, totally. Of course, everyone should have access to libraries. That's like, well, what about libraries of data? No, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hey now.
Yeah, it's the digital divide, right? It's going from like an individual human having to go to a library at a physical location and read a whole book versus press a button and my computer system all of a sudden has an artificial intelligence that can make better business decisions based on the entire planet's behavior. Huge difference, right? There's something there. We can't just give these analogies. It's not quite fair to reduce it to like I bought a suit at a store, but it is really important to draw those similarities as well, right? Because it's
and so that's to say stuff. that the first party, third party debate, it's not real, but it's kind of not focusing on the right thing to actually solve for the better world that certainly marketers hope for, but I think also that all the consumers in the world want.
Yeah.
They just don't understand how it works, and so they don't realize they want it.
The summary for a marketer looking at using information or purchasing data or partnering with a company to share information is don't work with sketchy groups. If you're going to get information about an industry, about a market, if you're looking for an audience list, like the kind of stuff we provide, look for a company that has invested time and money in trying to be above board and transparent, right? Who is following industry regulations, who engages with third parties to audit them, who has tight security, who has language around their websites that talk about this stuff, because this stuff does matter and it will matter legally and compliance wise and regulatory wise for your company. So you want to make smart decisions, but in no way at all do I think you should be limited in the information that you want to go seek out, right? I think that's a wonderful place in the world right now with technology. There's so much information at our fingertips, and not just personally, like with Wikipedia, right? It's in business too, right? We get to make our economy more effective and more interesting and more robust and more productive. And information is a huge part of it. So engage in that, participate in that, just do your best to be good about it.
That feels like as good a place as any to wrap it up. I hope This one felt extra philosophical and meandering, but it is what it is. We're literally talking about the types of.
I'm standing on a soapbox on top of a soapbox right now. By the way,
right. But hopefully that is still, it's a helpful overview ultimately of first, second, third party data, aggregators, originators, all that kind of different stuff. And I hope the structure of the conversation helps people understand sort of where it's going in the future. Cause it's really not, we as data driven marketers live in the space. We're really like, and I don't just mean me and you, I mean, anyone listening to this also, like we can affect our own destiny in this space. And it's important to understand all of these pieces rather than just sort of going, well, but the guy making the laws tells me third party is scary. And so I guess that's the future. Google says they're going to shut off cookies for privacy. That's what we're dealing with. It's like, it's just not that simple.
Yeah, that's every big industry in history. So
for sure.
Everything's cool.
But if you enjoyed this conversation, we'll have plenty more coming. So subscribe, do the thing wherever you're listening. This has been the Data Driven Marketer, sponsored by NetWise. I'm Adam.
Brian. Stay cool out there, everybody.
It is.
A fan and AC going.
I popped my shirt off halfway through the episode. I didn't say anything.
Just teasing the listeners.